The lounge at the Club Privado du Cygne was lively that Friday night. Hélène Gautier let her green eyes wander discreetly around the room. Between crystal glasses and the soft sound of the piano in the background, she masked her unease with a restrained smile. It was past 11. And, ironically, no one at that elegant table knew it was her wedding anniversary, not even that she had once been married. Exactly 1 year. Hélène gently twirled a lock of her golden hair between her fingers in an unconscious gesture, trying to dispel the memories that insisted on returning. She discreetly glanced at her left hand, bare, ringless. A pang struck her chest, but she took a deep breath. She picked up her champagne glass, took a slow sip, and forced herself back to reality. Erich Baumann, editor of Revista Hélène, leaned toward her with that wide, paternal smile of his. "Are you enjoying yourself, Hélène?" He was a man with lean features and thinning, grey hair, always trying to appear cheerful, though clearly uncomfortable in social settings. "Very much, Erich. Thank you," she replied sweetly. "Excellent, excellent." He patted her hand affectionately. It was also his birthday night, and the dinner had been organized to celebrate it. "That's good, very good." Not knowing what else to say, he looked around for a new topic. Hélène felt a bit sorry for him. "The singer has a lovely voice, don't you think?" she commented, nodding slightly. Toward the young woman on the small stage, whose voice filled the space with high, dramatic notes. Eric breathed a sigh of relief, as if he'd been rescued. "Ah, yes, very talented." Hélène smiled, returning her gaze subtly to the table. Eric was an excellent editor, much loved by the team. His instinct for knowing what readers wanted was remarkable, and all the women on staff respected him deeply. She had been working at Hélène for almost a year, and couldn't have wished for a better environment. The salary allowed her to support herself and help her mother with dignity. When she took the job, she feared being recognized by someone. Geneva was large, but the media world was small. So far, she'd been lucky. She rarely accepted invitations to these evening outings. She preferred a book and the silence of her apartment. But that night, she couldn't avoid it. Right beside her, Lisette Vollenweider, Eric's assistant, flipped through the menu with a cynical sigh. "Menus without prices. I hate the idea of paying blind," she muttered, her long fingers tapping on the table, nails perfectly painted red. Lisette, at 28, was beautiful, direct, glamorous, and ironic. She often said her two main interests were men and money, in that order. "They're all taken as usual," she said, raising a perfectly shaped eyebrow. "What?" Hélène asked, frowning. "The men, darling," Lisette replied, scanning the room, "all with their respective partners." Unfortunately, Hélène gave a short laugh. Lisette was like that, always ready with a comment, unfiltered but never malicious. Lisette leaned back elegantly and signaled a waiter with a subtle wave. "A martini, please." The young man seemed eager to comply. Lisette smiled as if she had just claimed a new conquest. Hélène merely watched in silence. "One day I'll find my Prince Charming," Lisette said with a touch of sarcasm. "Probably at 93. Hélène sensed something deeper in her tone, but said nothing. The two respected each other and worked well together, even without personal confessions. And then a glance caught her attention. Lisette lowered her glass slightly, eyes narrowing. "Who's that?" she asked suddenly, staring at something behind Hélène. Hélène turned slowly. A chill ran down her spine. There he was, tall, imposing, those piercing blue eyes locked on hers, as if time hadn't passed. Marc Delacroix. The face was the same. Angular, tanned, firm mouth, a subtle, purposeful smile. Hélène looked away, her stomach tight. "Marc Delacroix," she murmured coldly. "You don't like him?" Lisette asked, surprised. "No," she replied firmly. "Definitely not." "Well, I find him absolutely delicious. I'd devour him." "Be my guest," Hélène replied flatly. Lisette stared at her, intrigued. "Oh dear. There's history here, isn't there?" Hélène kept her gaze fixed on her glass. Yes, there was history, and his presence there felt crueler than fate. Lisette adjusted her dress, barely concealing her excitement. "He's coming this way. And he looks determined." Hélène felt her heart race, erratic. He wouldn't dare. Not here, not like this, but he would. He was Mark. She forced herself to breathe deeply. The black dinner jacket draped perfectly over his broad shoulders. That walk. The walk of a refined predator. "Good evening," he said, nodding slightly to Lisette. Lisette smiled like a satisfied sphinx. Erich stood up immediately, cheerful. "Mark! So good to see you, my friend." "Erich, how are you?" "Very well, very well." Hélène kept her face serene. The mask she'd perfected over the past year. She observed the greetings, every gesture, every glance. Erich, clearly excited, made the formal introduction. "Hélène Gauthier, this is Marc Delacroix." She raised her eyes. The tension in the air was tangible. "Mr. Delacroix," she said softly, extending her hand. She had to keep up appearances. "Mademoiselle Gauthier," he replied, taking her hand firmly, a touch that sent an electric current up her arm. She discreetly withdrew. He knew, and he was enjoying her discomfort. The night was just beginning, and Hélène knew that nothing about this reunion would be simple. Hélène stopped resisting at his words and looked at him bitterly. "To be honest, I'd rather forget." In a swift move, he twisted her arm behind her back, pulling her close, locking her against his body. "I know you would. Unfortunately, the only thing you can do is get a divorce." "What a great idea." Cruel smile twisted Mark's lips. "I don't think so. You know better than to take me to court. I'd make sure you walked out bleeding." She fell silent. He was right. As much as she hated to admit it, he was. She could never risk it. Mark would use every trick in the book, with no mercy. He was a bastard, and he didn't need any provocation to hurt someone. He studied her, with that familiar look in his eyes. "And annulment is out of the question, don't you think?" Hélène wanted to slap that smug, handsome face. She must have shown it in her eyes, because he held her tighter and shook his head. "Angry. Don't try it." I hit back, and it'll hurt. She glared at him. "I believe you. You're exactly the kind of man who'd hit a woman. I wouldn't be surprised if you even enjoyed it. It's not my usual habit, but I make exceptions. And you, sweetheart, are exactly that." A shiver ran down her spine. "Go on then. Hit me. That's how you deal with things, isn't it? That's your idea of fun." He squeezed her wrists, pulling her tight against him. Her breasts pressed to his chest. He smiled. "That's where you're wrong. This is how I have fun." His eyes burned into her lips before his mouth crashed down. On hers, punishing, she struggled, furious, twisting her arms, tasting blood on her tongue. Her heart pounded wildly, heat flooding her body. Her mind screamed in protest, but long-buried sensations awakened. She kept fighting, refusing to surrender to her own desires. He pulled back, breathing hard, eyes ablaze with desire. "I could almost enjoy hurting you, Hélène. Your resistance excites me." She was so furious she could barely speak. "Sit down." He pushed her into a chair on the terrace. She jumped up, but he shoved her down again, face tight with suppressed anger. "Sit and stay seated." She clenched her teeth, knowing there was no point in arguing with him. Marc Delacroix was like a steamroller, unyielding. She lowered her eyes, seething, rubbing her wrist. A red mark showed where he had grabbed her. "Now what?" she asked bitterly. "You bring out the Spanish Inquisition?" He towered over her, body stiff with restrained violence. "Don't be sarcastic." "It doesn't suit you." She looked up. "And what suits me? Humiliation? Your disdain? Is that how you see me?" "Don't be melodramatic." She laughed bitterly. "Melodramatic? I don't need to exaggerate. I'm naturally dramatic. Married for 5 hours, and I find my husband in bed with another woman. That's what you imagined. It's not what happened. So I'm blind and stupid now?" A tense silence fell between them. Neither moved. Mark turned his head toward the lights of Geneva. Hélène watched him from the corner of her eye, the strong jaw, straight nose, slightly arrogant. The city shimmered in the distance, lights dancing across rooftops. The lake reflected the soft glow. The evening air was cool and scented with summer dew. "I understand how you feel," he said quietly. "Do you, Mark?" "Do you really?" "Damn it!" She stood slowly. "What did you expect? Sympathy? If you can't control your urges, don't expect me to forgive." "Them." Ellie stepped closer. "You're letting your parents' mistakes cloud your judgment about marriage." don't need their mistakes. You've shown me enough yourself." His eyes flared. "I'm not your father. Just because he had a string of mistresses doesn't mean every marriage is doomed." "Oh no? Then what was that woman doing in your bed?" He gripped her shoulders tightly. "You were looking for a reason to run. You were ready for it." "So it's my fault now?" she scoffed. "Blaming me for your weakness?" He gritted his teeth. "You play judge and jury. You throw the black hood over my head and sentence me without a trial." She fought against his grip. "Don't speak in metaphors," she yelled, punching his chest. "I saw you. With my own eyes. What more do you need? I caught you red-handed. No excuses." His face darkened, eyes flashing. "You want to fight?" He grabbed her harder. Hélène lifted her chin. "Don't threaten me." But her voice faltered at the danger in his expression. He smiled cruelly. "Not so sure of yourself now, are you?" They stood in silence. Her eyes widened in fear. Her heart thudded. Her throat tightened. She couldn't look away from his body, poised like a predator ready to strike. "Let me go," she whispered. His face was stone. The stare pierced her, sending her into panic. "Let go," she repeated, trembling. The air crackled between them. She stared at his hard mouth, the thudding in her ears matching her racing heart. He was breathing hard too. She realized the effect she had on him. She pulled away, licking her dry lips. "No, please." Mark pulled her against him, claiming her mouth in a kiss that scorched. Heat melted her resistance. Her body softened against his, her heart thumping in disarray. His hands caressed her back and hips, pulling her close. She moaned, overwhelmed. "Hélène," he murmured hoarsely, caressing her waist. She threw her arms around his neck, heart pressed to heart. The flame between them was too strong. Mark drew back to look at her, intense. That mouth always had the power to undo her. "Darling, no, not again," she thought, confused. "I can't let this happen again." She broke away, gasping. "Why won't you leave me alone?" They stared at each other in total silence. Then Hélène turned and fled the terrace, aware of his eyes on her. The week passed in a blur of nerves and memories. She stayed inside, afraid, listening for the sound of his car, but he never came. Sunday night found her shaken and sleep-deprived. She had met Mark while working at a radio studio near Bern. He had come looking for an actress. She was carrying coffee, struggling with the door, when a deep voice said, "Let me help you." She turned and met the bluest eyes she had ever seen. He opened the door, but neither moved for a moment, faces close. Then he stepped back and let her pass. 1 week later, while she was filing, he appeared again, leaning on the doorframe. "Let's have dinner," was all he said. She hesitated. She was only 19. But he didn't accept refusal. A month later, they were engaged. She spent every evening with him. Dinners, theater, events. "I loved you so much, Mark," she thought now, watching the cold morning light through the window. Too much. On their wedding day, he had whispered, "Trust me, Hélène, I'll never hurt you." She had clung to that. But now, after what she'd seen, the memory of him in bed with that woman haunted her. Her mother had helped her escape through the back door that night. Mark had come back, tried to explain, but Hélène refused to listen. He'd returned for days, but her mother never let him in. Eventually, he gave up. That, too, hurt. She moved on. Slowly, bitter nights still haunted her. Now, back at work, Carly entered the office. "What's this?" she asked. "Just terrible coffee." "Pour me some." As they chatted, Carly suddenly said, "So, any news from our mystery man?" "Who?" "Mr. Marc Delacroix." "Friday night." Hélène turned red. "Oh, that. Yes, that. Come on, spill it." "Nothing to tell." The phone rang. Carly answered, then smirked. "It's for you." Very sexy voice. Hélène picked up, hand trembling. "Hello? Hello, Hélène?" She froze. "What do you want?" "Do I have to spell it out?" She glanced at Carly, who slipped out, grinning. "Anything else?" she asked sweetly. "Dinner." "No." "Lunch, then?" She sighed. "I can't." His voice turned cold. "Don't try to avoid me, Hélène. I'll find you." Her heart pounded. She knew he meant it. "Well, no, Mark. I'm sorry, but no." She heard him curse before she hung up. He knew where she worked. It was only a matter of time, and she wasn't ready. Hélène was stuck on the couch in her apartment, trying to read a book. She flipped through the pages restlessly, struggling. The words seemed to dance and vanish before her eyes. In a gesture of frustration, she slammed the book onto the table. She couldn't concentrate. It was like trying to decipher Chinese. She understood nothing. The doorbell rang and she froze, tense, glancing around. It couldn't be Mark, she thought, frowning. Maybe one of the neighbor nurses asking for milk or sugar. They always came by, full of smiles. When she opened the door, she froze. Mark walked in without ceremony, pushing it with his foot as she tried to close it. She stumbled back against the wall, startled. He stepped in, firm, his face hard. "Don't ever do that again." His voice was cold. She stepped back, exhausted and still tense. He stared at her, merciless. "You left me no choice." "What do you mean by that?" She swallowed hard, trying to control her shaking. He was still there, still present. "I told you this morning. I don't want to see you." "I insisted, and you ignored it." He took a deep breath, his blue eyes locked on hers. "I don't tolerate doors being slammed in my face." She remained silent. There was no reasonable explanation. Without looking at him, she tried to keep composure. "I don't think we have anything left to say to each other." She paused. "I'm sorry, Mark." He said nothing. The tension hung in the air. "Get your coat. I'm taking you to dinner." She stared, stunned. "You heard me. Say no." Mark didn't back down. With controlled arrogance, he repeated, "Get your coat." She felt cornered, without a way out. She took a deep breath, summoned her courage. "Fine. 1 minute." She went to the bedroom, tense thoughts racing through her mind. She slipped on a light coat and returned with firm steps. Mark waited patiently. She walked past him, heart steeled, and they left together into the mild night. In the car, he asked bluntly, "Did you reserve a table?" She pressed her lips. "You said you did." Silence. The city lit the streets with soft lights. She tried to understand what he was after. "Where are you taking me?" He shrugged. "Wait and see." They arrived at an imposing hotel. He stepped out and opened her door. She hesitated. "Where's the restaurant?" He took her arm. "Inside the hotel." They walked through the luxurious lobby and, without warning, entered a quiet elevator. "The restaurant's upstairs." She resisted. "I'm not going up there with you." He smiled. "I'd love to see you try to stop me." He stepped in with her. The doors closed. The floors rose slowly. The air grew heavy. She stared at him, furious. "Why are you doing this?" "I've made it clear I want nothing more." He sighed. "We need to talk." The doors opened into a grand lounge. He led her to a side door that opened to a wide room, decorated in ivory and gold. 3 doors aligned on the left. She noticed, "Looks like you wrote this script. What's behind the next door?" He only smiled, sharp. "And I thought I was the obsessed one. Seems it's contagious." She took a deep breath, annoyed. "I hate this little theater." "Then obey when I tell you." "You're so selfish." He came closer, with an arrogant smile. He touched her lips gently, heart racing. He took off her coat and brushed away the rest of her resistance. Just then, a knock interrupted. "Come in." A tall man appeared. "Good evening. We were informed of your arrival." "Thank you, Travers. We're ready for dinner." He motioned to close the door and gestured for her to sit. She sank into the soft chair, relieved. He sat across from her, watching her intently. "Martini. Just coffee." In the silence, she noticed a painting. The Swan of Paradise. He had once kept that piece in Geneva. Her chest tightened. The clock marked every second with relentless ticks. A heavy silence filled the space. At last, Travers announced dinner. They walked to the dining room, beneath golden chandeliers with steaming dishes. Between small talk, he told stories about the company. She laughed, but the discomfort lingered. Over coffee, they sat closer. She got up to look around the suite. She raised her voice. "How long have you rented this place?" His answer was dry. 6 months. He offered liqueur. She declined. They resumed the conversation. Then she fired. "How long have you known where I work?" "Who I work for?" He looked up. "I've always known." She froze. He had reports. He had moved behind the scenes. He explained, voice distant, that when he returned, Everything was already in place. Some changes had happened before she even realized. She swallowed hard and tried to react. He approached and took her hand. "I understand how you felt." She pulled her hand away, stood up, shrinking by the second. He persisted. "You're mine. I belong to no one but myself. I won't let go of what's mine." She gripped her last thread of composure and said firmly, "I never want to see you again." She ran to the elevator. He followed. "Stay a bit longer." She shook her head. "No, Mark." The doors closed. Her heart sank. Outside, the wind was cold. She slipped her coat on carefully. She looked back at the glowing hotel. One window was open, but it was too late. She hailed a cab. All she wanted was to sleep. Inside the suite, Mark heard the rustle of the curtain. The week following their encounter, Hélène barely slept. She lay awake through the long nights, watching the clock hands move, feeling Mark's presence in every thought. At the Elon magazine office, everything began to unravel. Her mind was flooded with images and words exchanged between them, and her focus collapsed. Mark's words about her father had wounded her deeply, as if he had deliberately reached into her past to hurt her. She had spent years trying to erase that part of her life, a part filled with bitter memories. Her mother, Madame Gauthier, had married young, pressured by family. At first, there had been love, but soon her husband got lost in fantasies and affairs. Madame Gauthier supported the family with dignity, while the betrayal spread in silence. Until one day, during an outing with Hélène, both witnessed her father kissing Ice, familiar woman, the final sign he would never change. The family shattered that day, and he vanished from their lives. Hélène never trusted a man again. Now she looked out the office window, exhausted, wondering why the past still found ways to hurt her. She took a deep breath, stood, and walked to the coffee machine, trying to calm the storm inside her. She heard footsteps behind her. She turned. It was Lisette, dropping coins into the machine with a laugh. "Out of coffee?" "Help yourself," said Hélène, picking up her cup. "Careful with all that coffee," Lisette joked. "It's just as harmful as certain men." Hélène gave a weak smile. "He's keeping me awake." Lisette raised a mischievous eyebrow. "The coffee or the men?" They both laughed, but Lisette quickly turned serious. "You look truly exhausted. Go home today." Reluctantly, Hélène agreed. Passing a shop window, she caught her reflection. Pale face, deep and sorrowful eyes. She walked on to the bus stop, feeling fragile. Then she saw Mark's car pull up beside the stop. Her heart raced. He stepped out and spoke in a calm voice. "Get in." She shook her head and looked away. Elderly women on the sidewalk were watching. Mark repeated, calm and firm, "Get in." "No. If you don't, I'll have to make you," he said, never raising his tone. She acted indifferent. He led her to the car. "Don't even think of leaving," he warned, starting the engine. On the drive, Hélène rubbed her wrists and looked at him, her anger barely contained. "Who do you think you are? This is pure coercion. If you think I can't do it, go ahead and test me." "I could sue you," she shot back. He looked over. "Go ahead, if you've got the guts." At a red light. "Let's see you. Call a lawyer in 30 minutes. I'm not going back to work today. I'm off." He glanced at her pale face and said bluntly, "You really do look awful." She held back and replied coldly, "Thanks for such a helpful observation." He raised one corner of his mouth. "Ego? You hardly know what that is." She straightened. "I have more confidence than you imagine." He gestured. "Living in self-pity, you seem to forget who you are." "Liar. I'm strong, and I won't let you dominate me." He smiled defiantly. "How do you plan to stop me?" She looked away. "I'll find a way. I'm physically stronger. You can't win." She looked him dead in the eyes. "Maybe, but you won't force me to trust you." They arrived at the building. Mark turned off the car. She felt small beside his tense face. He led her into the building, calmly pressed the elevator button. "You'll find out soon." They went to the 4th floor. Inside the elegant office of Editor-in-Chief Erich Baumann, Erich greeted her warmly. "Glad Mark found you. You remember him, don't you?" "Of course," Hélène replied, coldly. Erich smiled. "I have excellent news for your career at Elan." Her heart jumped. Mark secured an exclusive interview with Claudine Verhoeven and her husband, Russ Taylor. It will take place at their home in France for an entire week. She nearly choked. A week alone? Mark smiled slightly. Claudine wants to show everything. A week? She repeated, stunned. Eric added, "You'll be the lead reporter. Mark will be there overseeing everything. We'll also send a photographer." Hélène felt trapped. He wanted this, for some reason. She looked at him bitterly. "Thank you for the opportunity." Eric smiled. "Excellent. He'll go over the details with you." Mark left and she was alone with him. She confronted him. "What's with the theatre, Mark? Want to gloat?" "I don't know what you mean," he said, impassive. "I'm not interested." He took a step toward her. "Just say that for now." She breathed deeply. "I prefer to succeed on my own merit." He raised an eyebrow. "That takes time. Knowing how to use the right allies helps." She looked at him with contempt. "You're no ally. Maybe a lover." She flushed with rage. "You never will be. Not yet, but in the end, you will be mine." A chill ran down her spine. He was serious. "I'd rather die," she shouted. "Say that all you want." "I'd rather live," he whispered. She turned to leave. Mark grabbed her arm. "Going somewhere?" "Back to the office." He followed her, voice low and firm. "We need to talk." She resisted. "I want nothing to do with you right now." He moved closer. "Looks like you forgot. I get what I want." She gripped his arm. "I haven't forgotten." He turned her toward him. "You won't forget me, Hélène." They stood in silence. He gently lifted her chin. "Something wrong?" She couldn't answer. "Can I go?" "Why the rush?" She took a deep breath. "From you." He traced her lips with his fingertip. "I think you're afraid of yourself." She shook her head. He came closer. "And I think you want me to kiss you." Her heart pounded. He touched her lips gently. "Like this. And like this?" She responded, body tense, emotions swirling. He whispered, "Hélène, you drive me mad." Heat engulfed her. But then, a flash from their wedding night shattered it all. She broke the kiss, body stiff, eyes wide. He looked at her, confused. "What's wrong?" she whispered firmly. "Stop." At that moment, they heard the door open. Eric entered with an assistant, cheerful. "All ready?" Mark nodded in silence. Hélène seized the moment. "All set. Sorry, I need to go." She ran out, swearing never to be alone with him again. Every touch awakened buried pain. She hesitated at the door. Fear and desire still tangled inside her. Paris revealed itself in all its splendor. Vibrant, charming, captivating. A feminine city by nature, able to enchant even the most indifferent. Hélène leaned her face against the taxi window, taking in the scene of wide streets, lined with green trees under the blue June sky. The car crossed Place de la Concorde, where the obelisk gleamed under the sun. The traffic was chaotic. Impatient drivers honked and yelled from their windows. She smiled at the sight of the old Tuileries Palace. There was something solemn in the history etched into that square. In truth, she felt as if she had escaped a judgment. Mark had promised to meet her at the hotel, but was already an hour late. It wasn't his fault. The delay at Heathrow had been unavoidable, some mix-up between flights and irritated staff. She would spend the night in Paris because Elon's photographer, Mike Jensen, was stuck with another commitment. It was too late to cancel. Mark, always practical, had booked rooms for them both. The driver, with a dry expression and curious eyes, smiled at her through the rear-view mirror. "Première fois à Paris?" She smiled back, politely. "The city is delightful." Place Vendôme appeared, imposing. The cobbled streets radiated from its center like sunbeams. The bronze column rose into the sky, a monument untouched by time. The car stopped in front of the hotel. A uniformed doorman opened the door with precision. "Bienvenue, mademoiselle." Hélène paid the fare and crossed the cool marble lobby. Summer was beautiful, but Paris could be suffocating when the heat stretched on. She approached the front desk, her eyes scanning for Mark. "Mademoiselle Gautier?" The receptionist smiled. "Monsieur Delacroix is waiting for you in the lounge." Her heart quickened. She nodded and walked, clutching the key firmly. Mark stood out among the guests, as always. He had a presence that commanded the room, a quiet magnetism. How was the flight? She asked casually. He shrugged, trying to appear calm. A long wait in London. But otherwise it went fine. Air traffic issues? I think so. They made us wait behind a jumbo jet for nearly 20 minutes. She nodded. Mark signaled to the waiter. Martini? She agreed. I spoke to Claudine, he said casually. She's expecting us. She raised her eyebrows. Mike said he can only come tomorrow. Then we'll leave as soon as he arrives. She's eager. Mike is excellent at what he does, a bit restless but very talented. We've worked together twice. Mark studied her in silence. Are you free this afternoon? She hesitated. I suppose I am. I thought we could take a walk. There are some good bookstores nearby. She smiled, surprised. You remember that? How could I forget? You were an incorrigible book lover. They went to W.H. Smith on Rue de Rivoli. They walked between the shelves, exchanging glances and light remarks. Can we have some coffee? He suggested. Of course. They sat at a nearby French-style cafe. The conversation flowed easily until he made the proposal. Let's have dinner together tonight. I don't think it's a good idea. Why not? Because we always end up fighting. Then I propose a truce, just for one night. She studied his face carefully. She knew that if he insisted, he wouldn't back down. Fine, she gave in. A truce. He smiled, pleased. Later, he knocked on her door. She looked impeccable in white. You're going like that? Why? Is there a problem? You look too beautiful. You might hypnotize all the Parisian men. She blushed. You're exaggerating. They went out for dinner. The restaurant was elegant. Women looked at him openly. Hélène ignored it. The meal was light, but the tension between them was palpable. Do you want to do something afterward? He asked. I think I'll just read a bit. I'm tired. Let's walk through Paris. The city's gorgeous tonight. She sighed. Why not? They went out. The city was alive with lights and music. On Boulevard Saint-Michel, a small crowd surrounded street musicians. She wanted to listen. He agreed. When a young man smiled at her, Mark pulled her firmly. Why are you upset? Because smiling at strangers here can cause problems. He just smiled. Don't exaggerate. They walked in silence to the Latin Quarter. Some guys pinched her lightly. See, she said, biting. Now I'm actually bruised. I warned you. They continued to Shakespeare's. The lights reflected on the Seine, the city alive and romantic. She sighed. Mark, I'm sorry, Mark. I'm not in the right state of mind for this today. It's okay. Let's just walk. They went to the cathedral. She felt alone. Paris seemed made for happy couples. They weren't that anymore. Coffee? He suggested. She nodded. But the mood worsened. Why are you distant? He asked. Nothing. Just tired. You were fine earlier. Now you seem like someone else. And you're interrogating me as if I owed you an explanation. You're still my wife, Hélène. She swallowed hard. They returned to the hotel. At the door of her room, he held her arm. You're hurting me. Tell me you still feel something. She managed to slip inside, pushed the door, and locked it. Go away. Open the door, Hélène. She didn't answer. Silence fell. After a few minutes, she heard his footsteps walk away. She lay on the bed in silence and once again felt loneliness wrap around her. Hélène drummed her fingers on the arm of the golden armchair in the nearly empty room, looking around impatiently. Mike was supposed to arrive at 11, and it was already nearly noon. She sighed, rested the book on her lap, and took a sip of coffee. Mark had promised to meet her at noon, and the idea of being alone with him still felt uncomfortable. She glanced at the clock again, anxious for Mike's arrival. She hadn't seen Mark yet. He had probably had breakfast in the dining room while she had stayed in her room. Avoiding any awkward moments, like the tension from the night before, a warm voice whispered near her ear, "Hello, sexy thing." Hélène turned, surprised, and smiled at the sight of Mike Jensen, his brown eyes sparkling with joy. "You're late," she said, relieved. "Why?" Mike hugged her shoulders and let out a theatrical sigh. "Jealous, darling?" he teased. Hélène laughed. "I just hope it wasn't one of your girlfriends holding you back at the airport." Mike placed a hand dramatically on his forehead. They won't let go of me until I board. It's madness, she pushed him playfully. Stop with the nonsense. I want to sit down. Mike sat across from her, stretching out his long legs. His T-shirt read, "I'm a sex symbol," which made Helen burst out laughing. The waiter approached. 2 coffees, please. Mike winked at her. You're paying. She rolled her eyes, then quickly looked away when she noticed Mark standing near the elevator, watching them with a stern expression. They exchanged a brief glance. She turned away before he could see her with Mike. Trying to hide her nerves, she asked, "Was the flight very delayed?" Her words stumbling slightly. He shook his head. "A little. Julie took me to the airport." Hélène raised an eyebrow. "I thought you were with—" "Lisa," Mike shrugged, distracted. "Oh, her." She smiled. Poor Lisa. Friendship with him always turned into a joke. At that moment, she felt Mark's presence behind her. Mike noticed, stood up, and introduced himself. "Hi, I'm Mike Jensen." "How do you do, Jensen?" Mark replied formally. Mike chose another seat. Mark ordered whiskey, even though it was nearly noon. "I know what time it is," he said sharply. Hélène sensed the coldness between them. They had lunch early. Hélène looked at Mike. "Wouldn't it be better if you wore a jacket?" He laughed. "Do I look like a British pop star?" Mark raised an eyebrow. Not in this place," he mocked as they walked to the dining room. The photographer continued with his stories during lunch, and the stiffness in Mark's face slowly faded from Helen's view. The tension began to lift. Even annoyed, Mark seemed to be trying to relax. Later, they headed to Claudine's house, near Chartres. The car drove into a flowered avenue, and Hélène sighed at the sight of the grand white house. The hostess welcomed them with delight. "Mark, darling, so good to see you both. Was the trip pleasant?" Mark greeted her with a light kiss on the cheek. "You're looking splendid today, Claudine." She smiled brightly and invited them for a drink. "Make yourselves at home until dinner. It'll be at 7:30. Later, Hélène toured the guest rooms. The pink and blue room enchanted her. Mike, in high spirits, made remarks about the perks of the job. She settled in, gazing out at the garden through the windows, and planned to take a quick shower before dinner. When Mike showed up to talk, she let him in, but warned she had little time. He leaned back on the bed and said, "That Delacroix is tough, huh? I thought he was going to eat me alive when he saw me." Hélène sighed. "Don't be ridiculous, Mike. I have no idea what's going on in his head." Soon after, Mark knocked on the door. He entered with the most scowling face she'd ever seen. Mike immediately stepped away, and Mark addressed Hélène coldly. "He was here to talk to you about the interview." She took a deep breath. "We've worked together many times. He's just a colleague." Mark pressed. "Since when do you know him?" Hélène tried to stay calm. "Since I started at the magazine." Mark stepped closer, interrogating. "Have you ever visited him in his room?" She didn't know what to say. In tears, she said, "There's nothing between us. We're just friends." Mark didn't believe it. "Have you gone out together?" She erupted in anger. "Get out!" In an instant, he grabbed her arms and spoke, furious and hoarse. "If you have lovers, that concerns me." In a moment, everything changed. Hatred turned into desire. He kissed her hard, pressing her to his chest, until the kiss softened, became tender, intense. She gave in. The tension between them turned into a fiery passion. Hélène's body responded, torn between fear, pleasure, and guilt. Afterward, wrapped in silence, she felt guilt and confusion. Mark smiled faintly and asked, "Are you okay?" She murmured, "Yes," but her heart was pounding. He stroked her hair and kissed her forehead. "We were almost caught," he said, smiling. Silence returned, vast, broken only by a knock at the door. "Who is it?" Hélène whispered. "It's me," answered a female voice. "It's Claudine," said Mark, holding her firmly. "Just a moment. I'm getting dressed," she replied. Claudine entered and explained she needed to leave a message. Before leaving, she promised to see them at dinner. When the door closed, Hélène sighed with relief. Mark kissed her again, this time on the nose, and said, "I have to go, but I'll be back. We need to talk." She gave a sad smile and waited for his body to leave. Still, feeling the heat of that intense moment, Mark didn't return early. He only came into the room after Helen had already gone to bed. She heard the car stop, the door slam, and footsteps across the floorboards. She stayed completely still, listening, and the door opened, letting in a sliver of light. "Hélène, are you awake?" She pretended not to hear, keeping her eyes closed in tense silence. Slowly closing the curtains of her dreams, she breathed a sigh of relief when he walked away. She turned on her side, buried her head in the pillow, and cried softly. The next morning, the sun streaming through the blinds woke her. She smelled the fresh, damp air from the garden, and something pushed her to get up and walk among the flowers. The day was even more beautiful than she imagined. She walked through the flower beds, observing the rose bushes, while the previous night still weighed on her heart. The emptiness of the chair beside her still hurt. Mark's absence hurt just as much as her wounded pride. Something touched her back, and she turned, fearing it was Mark. "Good morning," a soft, sarcastic voice sounded. "Didn't know fairies strolled through here." A muse, perhaps? It was Russ, elegant and mischievous, black hair falling over his shoulders, a discreet earring shining on his earlobe. His dark eyes watched her with amused interest. "Mr. Taylor?" Hélène responded, half surprised. "You called me Russ last night." Dropping the informal tone so quickly, she smiled. She knew that charm, and didn't take it seriously. Russ, after all, made everything feel lighter. "Do you like the garden?" he asked, pointing to the plants around them. "It's lovely. Must be a lot of work to keep it like this." "I admit I'm not the gardener." He laughed. "That's Gaston. He wanders around singing his floral tragedies in French." She laughed heartily. "Sounds fun." "It is." "Here." Russ offered her a long-stemmed red rose. "To brighten your day." Hélène inhaled the soft fragrance of the flower. Russ leaned toward another, but stepped back, surprised by a thorn that pricked him. He examined his bleeding finger and whispered, stunned. "Exactly like some women, beautiful on the outside, but hiding thorns." Hélène laughed, gently sarcastic. "At least you were warned." As they walked, she thought of Mark and the promise he had made to return soon. Had she been unfair in not asking him first? Determined, she decided to wait. Russ interrupted. "How long are you staying?" "Until I finish the interview. I plan to stay a week." "A week? Wonderful. We could get to know each other much better." Hélène replied with a dry smile. "You should return the rose." "No, I'll put it in the vase in my room." Russ sighed and smiled lightly. "Behind that delicate appearance lies a strong heart. Will you interview me too, or just Jensen?" "You'll both be interviewed." He let out a laugh. "Perfect. When I saw your lovely face, I knew we'd get along." He then proposed something unexpected. A full day locked away in a private corner just for the interview. She trembled but politely declined. Later, they arrived at the house together, and Russ commented, pointing to a red car pulling in. "Look who's here." A tall, graceful woman stepped out of the car, Melissa Radcliffe. She had a wild beauty, deep blue eyes, black hair, a striking figure. Russ smiled, charmed. "Melissa, my unexpected angel." Melissa addressed Hélène in a soft voice. "Hello, Miss Gauthier." Then she introduced herself. "I used to be called Mrs. Radcliffe, but I prefer Melissa." Shock filled Hélène's chest. Jake had invited her. Why? Russ led them into the breakfast room, the air tense between the two women. Hélène tapped her fingers on the vase atop the wicker table, and Melissa made an effort to smile kindly. Silence was only broken when Mark entered, greeting her warmly. Melissa smiled sincerely. "He asked about Peter, her husband," and Melissa replied lightly, "He's fine." He sat next to Helen, making her even more uncomfortable. "Claudine hasn't shown up." Russ shook his head. "Nor Jensen. He must be around." Mark ordered coffee for everyone. The heavy silence deepened. Then Hélène stood. "I need to work." Mark stood as well, his eyes narrowed. "I want you to talk to Melissa." She reacted coldly. "Talk about what?" he said. "Seriously. I asked Melissa to come so you could talk. It's important, for both of us." Melissa spoke in a calm, firm voice. "Hélène, please listen to what I have to say. Something was said too late, and now we might not get a chance." Hélène trembled with distress. I didn't ask you to come. I never wanted this. Why don't you leave? Mark stepped in, holding her wrist. Don't blame her, please. She pulled away, furious. You two can vanish into oblivion together. At least leave me out of this chapter. There's nothing between us. Only friendship. Mark's tone tried to appeal to reason. She smiled bitterly. Millions wouldn't believe that. Melissa finally stood. He fell in love with you the moment he saw you. He ended everything with me then and there. No hangover, no regret. With tears in her eyes, Hélène swallowed hard. I can't bear seeing you together anymore. At that moment, Mike appeared in the doorway, confused. Wow, what happened to her? Hélène fled up the stairs, running to her room. She shut the door, tears streaming down as she leaned against the cold wood. How dare he bring that woman here? As if soft words could erase deep wounds. She couldn't believe those words. She was dying of love for him, but the pain and jealousy burned in her chest. Could she ever forget? Live without this desire? She was a fool, she thought. Unable to forget, unable to hate. Afternoon came, and all she allowed herself was a farewell to the mirror in her room. I'm a madwoman, still in love with the man who wounds me deeply. The two tears fell, silent. She clenched her fists tight and decided that whatever came, she had to move on. With or without him. Hélène had planned to interview Claudine the next morning, but everything became more difficult when Claudine didn't get up until after 11. Even then, she was irritable, distracted, her face grumpy. You shouldn't have let me sleep in so late, she complained to Russ. Too much sleep makes me feel awful. Dizzy, tired, heavy. Her husband looked at her with an indulgent smile. It's okay, darling. Tomorrow I'll drag you out of bed before sunrise. How about that? Claudine was horrified. No! God, no! That early? Even 9:30 is too much. I've woken up too early on film sets. That 5 a.m. chaos. It's bad for the soul and for the stomach. Hélène left them talking and quietly closed the door behind her. They were so close. Every gesture showed it. How beautiful it was to see a happy couple. Russ, despite everything, seemed to brighten Claudine, and she loved him. She thought to herself, not like me and Mark. She took a deep breath and walked into the garden. The interview would have to wait until the next day. What a shame. She had hoped to finish everything in 2 days. That way she could return to Geneva. Soon. She couldn't bear seeing Mark and Melissa together anymore. Every time she saw them, jealousy cut through her chest like a blade. Miss Gauthier, a voice called from afar. Hélène turned. There was Mrs. Winterbottom, hands on her hips, approaching. What is it, Mrs. Winterbottom? There's someone on the phone for you. I could tell it's a long-distance call by the little beeps. Hélène frowned. Did they say who it was? A man said he was your boss. Didn't sound like a boss, but maybe he was pretending. She sighed and walked toward the door. Thank you, Mrs. Winterbottom. I'm sure he wasn't pretending. She passed her, exchanged a tense glance, and picked up the phone. Hello? Hello, Hélène, my dear. Eric shouted. It's me, she smiled. So that's what they were talking about. The maid peeked at the stairs. Hélène threw her a glance. She answered with disdain. What is it, Eric? Go ahead. He cleared his throat. How's the interview going? Any progress yet? I've started, she lied. Excellent, excellent. Now, before I hang up, you need to stay 1 more week. She pressed her lips together. I figured. His voice became nervous. Big names are coming this weekend for the party to celebrate Claudine's new contract. She frowned. No one mentioned a party. They didn't? Oh, well. Lizette's opening the door now. Don't forget, we need your report on the event. Bye, Eric, she began, but he had already hung up. Why so much concern? No one had said anything about a party. She remembered Melissa mentioning something about her husband coming to a party, but why would Eric call to stop her from leaving? How did he know she planned to leave? She shut her eyes tight. Mark must have called Eric, asking him to make her stay. He wanted more time, certain that sooner or later she'd listen. She leaned against the wall, deep in thought. She had to speak with Mark, ask him to stop interfering in her life. Just then, she heard voices from the living room. She stood still, ear pressed to the door. "Mark, we have to tell her," said Melissa. Helene's heart clenched at the affectionate tone. Mark sighed. "You think I don't know? I've tried so many times, Lissa, but she won't give me a chance." Melissa continued. "Maybe I should talk to her. I know she hates me, but maybe hearing it from me will change how she sees things." He took another deep breath. "I don't know. Maybe you're right. I just can't think straight anymore. Darling, it's not just about what happened between us. There's more behind what happened to our marriage. Her father." Hélène heard it. Her father. Melissa knew. How could Mark share something so intimate with another woman? Yes. That's why we need to be careful. She's holding so much inside. One wrong step and everything falls apart. If she loses control, we'll never be able to talk to her. Melissa sighed. "But we have to tell her, Mark. We can't keep going like this. I know. It's killing me." Tears welled up in Hélène's eyes. Did he want a divorce? Was he going to marry Melissa? She remembered what had happened between them. Desire and betrayal, all tangled together. She clenched her fists, bitter. Mark could disappear from her life. She had no strength left. "Someone's outside!" Melissa's frightened voice echoed from the hallway. The door opened just as Hélène started climbing the stairs. She looked at Mark. "I heard everything you said." He lowered his head, anguished. "I understand." "You understand, do you? Then listen, you're free. There are no locks on your doors. You can do whatever you want. Get divorced. Marry whoever you like. Good luck to the woman who ties herself to you. She'll soon find out the liar and scoundrel you really are." Mark's eyes widened in shock. "I think you misunderstood, Hélène." She straightened, dignified. "No, Mark, my mistake was marrying you. But everyone makes mistakes. You're free to seek a divorce whenever you wish." She turned and climbed the stairs, breathing hard. He shouted, "Wait!" He ran after her, catching up. "Where are you going?" "To my room." He looked at her for a second. "No, come back to the living room and listen to what Melissa and I have to say, even if I have to drag you." She rolled her eyes, burning with rage. "I don't care if they—" "Here," she muttered, aware Russ and Claudine were on the staircase. He tightened his grip on her wrist. "And what do you think Melissa and I want?" She glared at him. "Don't play innocent with me. You have a past with her. You told me that yourself." Honestly, she looked at Melissa with disdain. "It's shocking she even wants you. Or maybe she fell for your charm, just like I did." Mark shook his head, incredulous. "You amaze me. You think I'm intolerant, selfish, manipulative. You think I enjoy playing women with words and flowers." She breathed deeply. "Making promises and not keeping them. That's not love. And you never kept one, did you, Mark?" He snapped. "Stop judging me through your father's twisted lens." His words cut like icy blades. They stood in silence. "Idiot," she whispered. "Please, give me a chance to explain," he pleaded. "I don't care about your drama anymore." "Do what you want, but don't expect me to beg for scraps of explanation." "I'm done with lies and games." She moved away from him, trembling. Then Mark grabbed her arm. "If you think I'll let you go like this, you're wrong." She saw Russ and Claudine at the top of the stairs. She yanked her arm back. "You want a scandal, don't you?" He stared at them. "I don't care if they—" "Here." She looked at him with disgust. "Go ahead, enjoy your little scene," and slapped him, hard. Only silence, and her footsteps fleeing up the stairs. Mark tried to stop her at the bedroom door. "You think arguing in public solves anything?" She trembled. "You arrogant, conceited man, you always come out on top. Well, not this time." She rolled her eyes, slammed the door, and locked it. He pounded on the door in fury. "Open up!" She stepped back. "Go away, Mark," he yelled. "If you don't open this door, I'll break it down," voices murmured. Downstairs. Then, with a crash, the door broke. Mark entered, furious. She gasped, heart racing. "Downstairs." "Now," he ordered. She swallowed hard. "No." "Go!" He pulled her, not gently. Embarrassed, she blushed deeply. Russ and Claudine stared in shock. He led her into the living room and shut the door. "Sit down." She obeyed. under their watchful eyes. Mark opened the door again. "Come in, Melissa." She enters with eyes sad and sweet. She asks softly, "Do you think she's ready to hear us?" "She will listen," he replies gently. They sit down. Let me start from the beginning. Melissa and I met years ago. Hélène lifts her head, her eyes filled with a mix of anger and restrained hope. Was it desire or reason? Could she truly believe what she was about to hear? Melissa leans forward, her voice as gentle as an old confession. "Mark and I were planning to marry. Before you appeared. That was before India." Hélène frowns. "India?" Mark speaks, calm and patient. "Melissa was working on a documentary with an international team. She traveled for months. We agreed, if the feelings were still there when she returned, we would marry." Melissa continues with a sad smile. "But I was never in one place for too long. The mail was a mess. None of his letters reached me. None of mine ever reached him." Hélène listens, but refuses to give in. "The pain is still there. When I came back, I found out he was going to marry you." Melissa pauses. "I was devastated. My world collapsed. But even so, I went to Hotel Montclair." She breathes in deeply. Her voice steadies. "I didn't go to separate you. I went because I had to see him. I needed to understand." Mark takes over. "When she walked into my room, I was stunned. I didn't know she was back. Didn't know she'd come looking. She was upset, and I tried to comfort her." Hélène looks at him cold. "You kissed her." He hesitates, voice tight. "It wasn't a kiss of love. It was a farewell, Hélène." "I never stopped wanting you," Melissa adds, painfully honest. "It was our last moment, the end of a dream. I loved him. But he was already yours." Silence fills the room. Hélène clenches her hands, head lowered. The weight of pain and pride mixes with a truth that becomes harder and harder to deny. Mark looks at her tenderly. "You never wanted to listen, Hélène. You never let me in. But the truth was always here." She raises her eyes, now filled with tears. "Why didn't you tell me before?" "I tried. I called. I wrote. I spoke with Eric. Begged him to make you stay." She closes her eyes. "Now, it all makes sense. The calls, the excuses, the silence, and the pain that once felt unfair, maybe wasn't. And now," she whispers. Mark moves closer, his eyes locked on hers. "Now, it's up to you. I've made it clear how I feel." She still resists. "You want me, but do you love me?" He doesn't hesitate. "With all that I am, I've desired many, Hélène, but I've loved only one." She smiles, bitter. "And what if I say I'm still afraid? Then let me prove it to you." Day after day, that love is stronger than fear. She cries. The tears she can no longer hold fall quietly. Mark wraps her in his arms, holding her with real, unwavering tenderness. "I want a life with you, not an unfinished story. And if I fall again, I'll catch you. Always." She rests her face on his chest, heart pounding. "It feels like coming home after being lost for so long." He whispers, "Come back to me." "I already have." Outside, Claudine and Russ exchange a look of relief. Claudine gives a small smile. "Finally." Russ laughs. "Ah, love. Always defeating misunderstandings." Mark and Hélène step back slightly, still holding hands. "I want to wake up next to you, see your hair on the pillow, have children with you, and grow old in Charmont, listening to the sound of flowers opening in the garden." She laughs through tears. "That sounds like a good plan." He kisses her slowly. A kiss filled with restrained but complete emotion. A kiss that doesn't begin again, but finally recognizes what always existed between them. Evening light spills into the room. In the silence now is peace.